voice, but I had no idea. And then Steph said, "Is that Jeremy Lewis?" Good to see Jeremy Lewis. It's been a long time, brother. Good to see you. All right, Romans 7 is the first of two main passages we're going to be looking at tonight. It's funny over the years that preaching, that you have some people that will say, "Man, that was a great sermon. I really appreciated that. I got so much out of that." And I'm thinking, I didn't think it was all that good of a sermon at all, and well, thank you. And then there's sermons where I think, man, I think I did a good job with that, and nobody says anything, and it's like, well, that was okay. And the point is, you never know what people need. And I realize there's different styles of preaching and all of that, and different ways to deliver all of that, but as far as the lesson goes, it's applicable, and it should always be applicable, but it depends on what you're going through in your life, and it depends on interest. Doing the study on angels recently, I don't know how many people say, "Man, I thoroughly enjoyed that," and then there's some like, "Well, yeah, that's okay." And so it just depends on what you like, what you're interested in, and a lot of times what you're going through as well. So this is a lesson that I think every single one of us can benefit from, because who in the world does not go through valleys? Every one of us have mountaintop moments. We have those times in our life where everything is going smooth, going our way, and maybe there's no sickness and everything. Maybe we got a raise and we got a good job and our family's well and everything's going well, and we got those valleys, those difficult times in our life. That's normal. Here's what's not normal. And I've known a lot of people like this. You have as well. And so we need to pray for people like this and try to get them to realize that it's not normal to stay in a valley for too long. That's not normal to not work yourself out eventually. And so as we look at this, we're looking at something that one of the greatest men of all the New Testament, that wrote more than half the New Testament, inspired by the Holy Spirit, dealt with, and that's the Apostle Paul. And so I want to do two things this evening. First of all, I want us to look at two passages where the Apostle Paul is dealing with some valleys, some difficulties in his life, and he's going through some struggles, and what he says about that, and maybe some things that we can learn from that. And then secondly, let's look at maybe how we can deal or recognize maybe why we're in some difficult times in our life and why we have some struggles. This is not something in depth. I've actually taught this as like an entire quarter before. And so maybe one of these days we can look at that. So I'm skimming the surface tonight looking at some of these things, but hopefully they'll be beneficial to us. So first of all, Paul found himself there in valleys. So turn in Romans chapter 7. That's where we're going to be reading in just a moment. Romans chapter 7, beginning with verse 14. "For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal," that is physical, "sold under sin. For what I am doing, I do not understand. For what I will to do, that I do not practice, but what I hate, that I do. If then I do what I will not to do, I agree with the law that it is good. But now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, nothing good dwells. For to will is present with me, but how to perform what is good I do not find. For the good thing that I will do, I do not do, but the evil that I will not to do, well, that I practice. Now, if I do what I will not to do, it is no longer me, the one who wills to do good. For I delight in the law of God according to the inward man, but I see another law in my members, that is in my body, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity in the law of sin, which is in my members." Let's just stop there for just a moment. So, a lot of times when we go through difficult times, we think, well, what is it that I've done? A lot of times, looking at Job is a good example of that, where his friends like, "You must have done something wrong, right? You must have messed up or committed to sin to be going through this." And so we assume that. But sometimes we're in a valley because of somebody else. That's just the way that it is. We'll talk, sometimes it's our fault, and we need to be able to look at that, but sometimes we're going through difficult times, and it's no fault of our own. I like to say this, life happens, right? we live in a fallen world, and because of that, because of sin in this fallen world, you have natural disasters. Some of us know that even better than others. Tornadoes and things of that stuff, so we suffer because of that. Also living, of course, with other people that have, of course, the freedom to make decisions. Sometimes their decisions affect us, like a drunk driver getting out there and running into a loved one and killing them or something of that nature. And so their decisions sometimes affect us in a negative way as well. Well, Paul here is struggling with what? He's struggling with the flesh and the spirit. And I love this because he's a giant in the faith. And it helps me to understand that someone that is way, way, way up, I consider way above me, could be dealing with something like this because I deal with stuff like this, and so I can relate to that. One of my favorite preachers in the world, besides my granddaddy Earl Richardson, was Mike Nix. And I know I've talked about Mike before, but I just thought the world of him. He was one of my mentors, and he was a preacher, my preacher for several years. I just remember going to gospel meetings and things with him, and I just really, really looked up to him. And so in my mind, he was the best preacher ever, but he really was the best preacher ever. But he was also a great, great people person. Man, everybody, nobody, if you knew Mike, you knew that. Well, something that helped me out, actually, is when he went over to Beltline in Decatur, as big as that church is. I remember hearing and talking to some people. I was jealous, because he left us at Midway back years ago to go to Beltline. And so, how are y'all liking Mike? And I can remember there was a few people that were saying, well, I have this problem with him, or I don't really like him. He's not all that good of a preacher. And I thought, what? Are you serious? But it actually helped me out. Because it helped me to realize that, this is not a competition of any kind, and I'm not up here to do a song or dance or anything, or you take that shepherd's hook and yank me right down. I'm not up here to entertain. I'm up here to preach the gospel, and I do it in my way, and he did it in his way. Some people were going to like it. Some people were not going to like it. So I told you all that to say this. It helped me to realize that man was a great preacher and a great minister, but not everybody liked him, okay? And so it helps me to look at the Apostle Paul and to realize that this great man that had the full inspiration of the Holy Spirit would go through difficult times where he's saying, I don't know what is up or down. Notice a few things that it says, what I will to do, that I do not practice, but what I hate, well, that I do. Can you relate to that? Do you have good intentions, but a lot of times you do what you don't want to do, and you're like, man, I can't believe I did that again. He says, for the will that I will not to do, I do not do, but the evil I will not to do, that I practice. And I like this in verse 27 there, or 21. Yeah, for I delight in the law of God according to the inward man. So that tells us right there that he had a desire to do what was right, but he was having this inward struggle, if you will. Notice what he says here in verse 24. O wretched man that I am. Who talks like that? That's not today's language. Nobody says, oh, wretched man that I am. So notice what wretched means. It can be defined in this way: deeply afflicted, dejected, or distressed in body or mind, extremely or deplorably sad or distressing. So in Paul saying, oh, wretched man that I am, that's what he's saying. I am down in the dumps. I am depressed. I am struggling right now. The Apostle Paul says that. If he goes through things like that, you better believe we're going to. Now let's look at the second passage here, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, and look at another example of Paul struggling and being in a valley. And man, did he have some valleys. Goodness. We read about those here in this passage. Just one right after the other. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, beginning with verse 23. From the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. So that's 199, I believe, because we don't talk that way. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils of the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and in nakedness, besides the other things, what comes upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches. And so here Paul is struggling, and notice what besides all of these things, he's saying, I've got a deep concern, a deep love for churches. It makes me think of a parent. You know, as a parent, you go through problems in your life, different problems. They might be job-related, health-related, whatever they are. And then besides all of that, and by the way, you know, it doesn't matter if your kids are grown. I think maybe even more so when they're grown and they're out of the house making their own decisions and stuff. Then besides all of those things, you have what? This great concern about your children as well. And that's what Paul is saying here. Besides all of these things that I've gone through, you know, these beatings, shipwreck, all these different things, then I have the concern of the Lord's church and whether or not they're, how they are doing, if they're going through difficult times, if they're being abused and everything. And so here Paul is. This is the one that says that I've learned in whatever state I am to be content. I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. Who can separate us from the love of God? Rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say rejoice. And so that's the Apostle Paul on the mountaintop. And now here he is and he's saying, well, I've sinned, I'm struggling, I'm sad, I'm miserable, wretched man that I am. So remember that. When you're going through difficult times, no matter what they are in your life, remember that the Apostle Paul went through difficult times as well. So none of us are above that. Now, let's change gears here and ask ourselves some questions, trying to identify a valley. We must try to figure out, I think, why we're in a valley, why we're going through a difficult time. So the first thing we need to do is look in the mirror, right? Why am I here? Is this a mistake that I've done? Is this rebellion on my part? Am I not trying to live, you know, according to God's will? Have I made a dumb decision in my life? This is one, it seems like common sense, but this is one that so many people are not willing to do. Because what we do is we play the blame game. We will blame everybody in the world. We'll blame circumstances and upbringing and everything in the world except for looking in the mirror. And so ask yourself, why am I in this? And it might be that it's a decision that you made way back when that led to the problem that you're going to right now, but you're never going to get out of it unless you come to terms with yourself and realize that I'm part of the problem. Have you ever talked to anybody, or maybe you've been this person that you've been maybe from job to job and they always say, man, it's always the same thing. Those people there, they don't work hard, they don't get along with them, and then they go somewhere else, it's the same thing. Or church. And they hop from church to church and they always say the same thing, you know, they weren't nice to me there and they didn't do this or they did that and I didn't like that. And when they're sharing that with me, I'm thinking, well, there's one common denominator here. You know, and I don't try to judge anybody, but if I hear somebody talking to me about that and it's been several different jobs or congregations, I'm thinking, yeah, you might need to look in the mirror, right? You might need to see that the one common denominator is you. And maybe you need to look in the mirror and have an honest face-to-face, right? And realize that you're the reason why you're going through difficult times. All right, so it is beyond is it beyond my understanding? So that's if we see that we're going through difficult times, we're honest with ourselves, and we realize, okay, it's not me. Then one of the things that we need to do at that point, I think, is just kind of let it go as far as trying to understand why we're there. Because good things happen to bad people. We know that, right? And so you do need to question at first, why am I here, to see whether or not it's something that you've done that you can control. But if you've done that and you realize, well, I don't really think it's me, I don't think I've done anything to deserve this or to go through this, then just let it go. And a lot of times we don't, even if it's not our fault. We just hang on to it and we rack our brain and we drive ourselves crazy trying to figure out, well, what is the root of the problem? I don't understand why I'm going through all of this. And as Isaiah 55:8-9, as the prophet there says that about God, my ways are not your ways, nor are my thoughts your thoughts. You know, you don't have to understand why you're going through that. And so good examples of that is Job and Joseph, right? You know, what did Job do to deserve what he went through? He lost everything. What did he do to deserve that? He didn't do anything, right? We know, of course, reading that, hindsight, we know that it was Satan that said, let me at him, basically. So it was nothing of Job, and yet he was going through all of this. And everybody around Job was trying to figure out, what in the world have you done? But Job, one thing that stands out is that he was faithful, right? He was faithful. There's nothing wrong questioning why things are happening the way they are. There is something wrong with turning your back on God because of that and blaming God. There's a big difference there. Job never blamed God. Joseph is a good example of that as well. What did Joseph do to deserve to be thrown in a pit, sold into slavery, to be thrown in jail, to be forgotten about, to be accused of something he didn't do sexually? What in the world did he do to deserve that? Well, he had brothers. And he was at the wrong place at the wrong time that ended up being the right place at the right time. But the point is, he didn't do anything to deserve it. Now, he could have sat there and wallowed in it and racked his brain and tried to figure out, how in the world did this go? Woe is me, and tried to figure that out and just didn't go on with his life. But he didn't do that. He trusted in God, and look what happened. He ended up saving a nation, right? His family and an entire nation as a result of that. You think about Job. He didn't blame God. What happened with Job? He got everything that he got plus so much more because of his trust in God. So in identifying the problem, look in the mirror first, but then secondly, if it's nothing that you have done, just learn to let it go best you can. Trust in God, right? And realize that bad things happen to good people. All right, so after identifying that we are in a valley and why, how should I respond to that? Number one, hang tough. Just try to hang in there. We tell people that all the time. Hang in and work in the valley. What is in the valley, agriculturally speaking, farmers? Fertile soil. I'm not a farmer, but I do know that. So fertile soil, a lot of times the same is true with in valleys that are difficult times. You have the most potential for growth in those times. And I think about my life and some of the difficulties that I have helped me to grow because I didn't turn my back on God, because I didn't blame God. It actually helped me to grow more then than I would have ever grown if I had not had that problem. Good examples of that is Daniel. And you think about what Daniel went through and being thrown in the den. He didn't do anything to deserve that. In fact, he was doing right. And yet he just had to hang on and had to do what was right regardless. And I love the account of Esther. Esther, and what does that say? Esther 4 and verse 14. Who knows whether or not you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And that is a real eye-opener, because here's the thing. The providence of God, that is such a rich topic, and I could talk forever and a day about that, and I still don't know squat about it, but it's wonderful to think about because it's true and it's very encouraging. You never know why things happen the way that they do, and sometimes they're bad things, but those bad things will lead to good things. And the only thing that's going to cause that to happen in your life is your trust and your faith in God and living for Him. And so you see that with Esther, who knows? Well, whatever that valley is and that difficult time that you're going through in your life, who knows whether or not God allowed that to happen to you in your life for a certain, maybe to bring someone to the Lord, maybe to help somebody else out. Who knows? And so trust in Him when it comes to that. So you respond by hanging on, right, and trusting in God. And then secondly, changing directions. When do I change direction? Well, it's when I've committed sin. That's when I need to realize that I need to repent and make a change in my life. This is a life metaphor. How do y'all like that? And so the street, of course, or the sidewalk, whatever it is, represents life. And of course, this guy's going through life, and he's he's in a hole, literally, right? All right. So I walk down the street, there's a deep hole in the sidewalk, I fall in, I am lost and hopeless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Oftentimes we have valleys, difficulties in our life, and we're not willing to look at self, like what we talked about. It's not my fault. I'm in this hole. I'm going through this difficult time, and man, I'm struggling like everything. It ain't my fault. So-and-so, if they hadn't made that decision, if they hadn't have done that. Not willing to look at self. A I walk down the same street, there's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it, I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place again, but it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. So notice that, I pretend I don't see it. How often do we have problems in our life, whether they're self-inflicted or from somebody else that maybe we're around that maybe we shouldn't be around? And we fall subject to things because of bad influences, 1 Corinthians 15:33, and I pretend that it's not there. And deep down inside, I know the root of the problem, but I don't want to. Sometimes it's family. You know, nobody wants to hear what the Lord had to say about family. They're having to give up family sometimes. That doesn't mean you don't love them anymore, and that doesn't mean that you don't try to do for them, but sometimes you have to kind of cut yourself off. Sometimes you got to walk away. Sometimes you got to stop helping them out, because in helping them out, you're actually not doing them any favors at all, right? So it's hard. So don't pretend like the problem's not there just because you don't want to deal with it. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open, I know where I am. It is my fault I get out immediately. So here I am in a difficult time. I'm able to get out immediately because notice that I realize it's my fault. Now, I underline that it's a habit. So do you have any reoccurring problems in your life? Is there any valleys in your life that you find yourself in, like what I was talking about with someone talking about their family or somebody talking about their work, and it's over and over and over again? What's the common denominator? Well, it's you. Are there some things in your life like that, and it just keeps happening over and over and over again, and maybe you need to realize that maybe there's something that you can do to change that, but you've got to be willing to look at yourself. And once we're willing to say, hey, this is my fault, I can do things differently, then we can begin to grow. I walk down the same street, there is a deep hole in the sidewalk, I walk around it. Learning to avoid catastrophe in one's life, you know. Learning the places not to go, the people not to be around, the decisions not to make in our life to avoid hardship. What about that one? I walk down another street. I think after falling in holes that much, it's time to make a change. Let's go a different direction. And sometimes that's what we've got to do. Don't always look for a shortcut. Now, this is something that has amazed me over the years talking to different people, that sometimes people will come in and talk to me in my office, and they'll talk about something that has happened over a long period of time, and they're trying to get out of it, and they can't understand that I've been trying for 2 whole weeks now to get out of this, and I can't seem to get out of it. Something that has taken them sometimes years and years to get into because of bad decisions, and they think I'm supposed to get out of this immediately. You know, if it took you a long time to get there, it may take you a long time to get out, right? And so don't just be looking for shortcuts as well. I put the passage there from 1 Peter 5 because it's very encouraging to me to think about that. He says, resist him, talking about Satan, firm in the faith, knowing that the same kind of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. Now, I realize what he's talking about there is suffering at persecution, if you look at the context. But the point is, whether it's persecution or whatever it is from Satan. All the evil and the bad in the world is from Satan. And realize, don't ever think you're the only one going through it. Don't ever think that you're the only, nobody else knows how I feel. Yes, they do. Now, don't ever tell anybody I know how you feel. That's a big no-no. Y'all know that. But don't ever think that nobody else knows, because they do. So some words of application. First of all, life has peaks and valleys, so just realize that. Don't think necessarily that you've done something wrong just because you're going through difficulties in life. Number 2, valleys offer us opportunities to grow if we need to recognize why we're there. And so just like if it's something that you have done, then you repent of that, and you start making different decisions, and then you can grow. And then we must always stay strong in times of trials. Amen? God allows things to happen to us to build us up. And, you know, there in 1 Peter chapter 4, he talks about, don't think it is a strange thing when you're tried by this fire. You know, we're going to be tried by fire to see whether or not we're going to be strong and see if we're faithful to the Lord. Can we help you out this evening? Is there something that you're going through in your life right now, whether it's health-wise or maybe with a relationship or something in your life? It may be sin that you're struggling with, but that's why we're here. That's why we're a family, to help one another out. I want to encourage you to look at yourself, look in the mirror, and try your best to help other people out. And it's amazing when you do that, how it will help you out as well when you put other people before yourself. But is there something that you can share with us tonight that we can pray with you about? Any need whatsoever, let us know, and we'll stand and sing this song for our encouragement.